Welcome back to Mysteries Crime Stories, the channel where we dive into the darkest crimes, the strangest cases, and the mysteries that have haunted generations. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss these mysteries. Tell us in the comments what you think about the cases we cover, what you'd like to see in future videos, and share this story with anyone who would find it important. Now, let's begin. This is why you should never live next to a graveyard. Graveyards stand as silent witnesses to centuries of sorrow, their headstones weathered by time, their soil heavy with secrets. For some, these resting places bring peace, a quiet reminder of life's fragility. For others, they are spaces to avoid, places where the boundary between the living and the dead grows unbearably thin. What happens when that boundary is not just near, but pressed against the walls of your own home? The stories that follow come not from legend alone, but from whispered accounts passed through generations. They begin in old towns and forgotten villages, where people who once lived beside graveyards discovered too late that the dead never truly rest. Part 1. The House by the Willow Trees. In a forgotten countryside, there was once a cottage tucked against the iron fence of a graveyard. The land was cheap, the soil fertile, and the family who moved there thought nothing of the cemetery next door. Beyond the fence stretched rows of gravestones, shadowed by towering willow trees that draped their branches like curtains of mourning. At first, the house was ordinary. Warm light spilled from its windows, laughter echoed in its halls, and the family grew used to the sight of mourners passing by with bouquets of fading flowers. But as weeks turned into months, the graveyard began to intrude in subtle ways. At night, when the wind fell silent, the family heard what sounded like footsteps crunching over dead leaves, slow, deliberate, circling the house. The father would storm outside with a lantern, but no one was ever there. The gate remained locked, the paths undisturbed. Yet every morning, footprints appeared in the mud beneath the windows, leading from the graves to the cottage wall. The children complained of voices in their bedroom, whispers drifting through the night, calling them by name. One daughter said a woman in black stood at the foot of her bed, hands clasped as if in prayer, face hidden by a veil. The mother dismissed it as imagination until she, too, began waking to find her sheets tugged, her dreams interrupted by the sensation of someone sitting heavily on the mattress beside her. As months passed, the air inside the home grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp soil. Objects shifted in silence, chairs scraping across the floor when no one was near, photographs sliding from walls, clocks that stopped precisely at midnight. The family began to notice something else. The willow trees leaned unnaturally, their branches stretching over the roof as if reaching for the house itself. It ended one night in winter. Snow blanketed the graveyard, yet the family awoke to the sound of soil being shoveled, the unmistakable scrape of iron against stone. When they peered through frosted glass, they saw a figure digging furiously at a grave, though the earth was frozen solid. By lantern light, they recognized the face, their own father, eyes vacant, skin pale, hands moving in frantic rhythm. Yet he was still in bed, shivering beside them. The family fled the cottage by dawn. The house still stands today, vacant, the willow trees pressing ever closer, their roots burrowing through the foundations. Locals say anyone who dares step inside hears the sound of shovels striking frozen earth and the quiet sobbing of a woman in black. Part 2. The Midnight Bell. In the heart of an old English village, the church graveyard was bordered by a single row of houses. One in particular, a narrow stone dwelling with ivy strangling its walls, was infamous among locals. They called it the Bell House, for its windows overlooked the church steeple and the cracked bronze bell that tolled only for funerals. Generations of tenants lived there, though none remained long. The bell had not been rung in decades, its rope frayed, its clapper rusted. Yet at midnight, neighbors swore they heard it toll, a deep, mournful sound that shook the air. Those who lived inside the bell house heard it louder than anyone. One woman kept a diary of her time there. She wrote of nights when she lay awake, listening to the phantom ringing. Sometimes it came with the creak of pews inside the church, as though invisible mourners were gathering for a service that never ended. Sometimes it was followed by knocks at her door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the halls, though no visitor stood outside. She described a night when the tolling grew unbearable, shaking the glass panes of her windows. She crept to the cemetery and saw shadows moving between headstones, figures draped in funeral cloths, drifting toward her house. They carried candles that burned with blue flame, and their procession ended not at the church, but at her front door. The diary ends abruptly, its last words scribbled in haste. "The bell rings for me." The house was abandoned soon after. To this day, when mist covers the graveyard, villagers claim the bell can still be heard, its sound hollow, summoning not the living, but the dead. Part 3. The Gravedigger's Daughter. Graveyards are not only for the departed, they are workplaces for the living. One tale speaks of a family who inherited a small cottage bordering a rural cemetery. The father worked as gravedigger, his daughter often playing among the tombstones, weaving flower chains and leaving them on headstones as gifts. She was no stranger to death, but one autumn evening, something changed. While her father dug a new plot, she wandered to the farthest corner of the yard, where the oldest graves leaned, forgotten. There she saw another child, pale, barefoot, dressed in rags. The girl smiled but said nothing, pointing instead to a sunken grave. When the gravedigger's daughter told her father, he grew pale. That section of the cemetery was centuries old, its graves long untouched. Yet, night after night, the child returned. Sometimes she whispered secrets, sometimes she simply stood, watching with hollow eyes. The gravedigger forbade his daughter from visiting, but the connection deepened. The child began appearing inside the house, at the foot of the bed, in the reflection of the glass, even seated at the dinner table. Her presence grew bolder. Doors slammed, food spoiled, and the family awoke to the sound of children's laughter in the halls. One night, the gravedigger awoke to find his daughter's bed empty. He ran into the cemetery, lantern in hand, and saw her standing in the far corner, hand in hand with the ghostly child. Before he could reach her, the earth beneath the old grave collapsed. By the time he pulled her free, her hair was white, her eyes vacant, and her voice, when it returned, was not her own. The house was abandoned. The girl never spoke of what she saw, but those who encountered her swore she spoke in 2 voices, one her own, the other belonging to someone long dead. Part 4. The Apartment Above the Mausoleum. In a crowded European city, housing was scarce. One block of apartments was built directly above a sprawling cemetery, the foundations laid across old burial vaults. Tenants complained of cold drafts seeping through cracks in the floor, of smells of damp stone and rot. One man, a student, lived there for nearly a year. He reported nights when knocking rose from beneath the floorboards, slow, rhythmic, like someone rapping from inside the vaults. He tried to dismiss it as water pipes until one night the knocks spelled words in patterns he recognized, letters, names, his own among them. Soon his sleep filled with dreams of corridors underground, lined with coffins. He wandered through them, always guided by faint candlelight, always drawn deeper. He would wake drenched in sweat, only to find dirt on his sheets, grave dust beneath his fingernails. Neighbors heard him screaming at night. Once they found him clawing at the floor, prying at the boards as though something beneath was calling him. When they pulled him away, he fought with inhuman strength, his eyes rolled white, his voice babbling in languages long forgotten. He disappeared before the lease ended. Some say he broke through the boards one final night and slipped into the mausoleum below. His apartment has remained locked ever since, the floor scarred with deep gouges, as though someone dug their way downward, toward the dead. Part 5. The Curse of the Caretaker. In America's Deep South, a caretaker lived in a small house built into the cemetery grounds. He was a solitary man, known for his devotion to the graves. Every evening he walked the rows with a lantern, speaking to the headstones as if they were neighbors. But his devotion turned darker. He began leaving offerings, bread, coins, even drops of his own blood, at certain graves. Locals whispered he had struck bargains, trading his soul for knowledge. His house grew cluttered with relics, bones polished like ivory, jars of earth from freshly dug plots. One winter, visitors noticed strange activity. Fresh flowers appeared on ancient graves, though no mourners remained alive. Candles flickered in the caretaker's windows long past midnight, though the man was never seen by day. Then came the sightings. Figures gathered around his home, silent, unmoving, their outlines faint as mist. One night, the caretaker vanished. His lantern was found in the cemetery, still burning. His house reeked of decay, the floors blackened with soot. On the wall above his bed were claw marks, too high to have been made by any man. The house remains, but locals warn against entering. At night, they say, the caretaker still patrols the grounds, his lantern drifting through the mist, carried not by his hand, but by something unseen. These are the stories that haunt those who dared live beside graveyards. They are not simply places of rest, but thresholds. To dwell too near is to invite the whispers of the earth, the touch of unseen hands, the toll of bells long silenced. The living believe they own the land they build upon, but the dead do not forget. Their graves are boundaries, and when those boundaries are crossed, the price is always collected. This is why, no matter how peaceful the silence may seem, no matter how still the stones may stand, one truth endures: you should never live next to a graveyard.